we're going to look at the div tag. This is a container tag in HTML. A container is basically a square or a rectangle that we can use to do layout and organize our visual presentation of the page. We're going to use the div tag to center this page and control the width of the page. Now remember, a div tag is a block level tag, so anything that comes after the div will have a line of white space before the next content starts. We're just going to use one div tag on this page to encapsulate all of the content. We want to regulate the width and we want to center it. So let's code a div tag. You'll notice how the content on this page goes from end to end, no matter how big or small I scale the browser window, it's always all the way to the edge. We're going to work on this a little bit. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go to our code editor, and we're going to put a div tag that surrounds all of the content on our page. So we're going to come in right after the body tag and write our opening div, div, and then we're going to go down to the very bottom of the page, and at the end, right before the closing body tag, we're going to close our div tag. Alright, so we have our tag. Nothing's changed because we have not applied any CSS to this tag. We're going to use a tag selector for this. So let's go in and start writing some rules in the head of our document. So I'm going to save this since we've done some work. And just proof of concept, since we've added the div, I refresh, nothing's changed. That's because we have not written any CSS. So I'm going to come up to the head of my document. And this is a tag selector, so don't mix your class and tag selectors. Always write all of your tag selectors above your class selectors. That's just the best formatting for writing CSS. So I'm going to write div for our div tag, give it a space and put a curly brace in. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width of our div. So I'm just going to type a declaration, width, colon. I'm going to set a fixed width and I'm going to make it 580 pixels. So there's 580, and don't forget to put your measurement units in, and that's pixels. I'm going to file save that, and let's look at what happens. And refresh. You notice now that all of our content is set to only go as wide as 580. It can set like that, but it won't go any wider. So now let's look at another thing. Let's look at how we can add a background color to this page to make it a little more visually appealing. Now you can apply things to the most global level tag on the page, and that's your body tag. So we're going to set a background color that affects everything on the page. That's going to be above the div tag and outside of the div tag. So let's go back and write a rule for our body tag. I'm going to write it before the H1 since it's the most global tag. Just write body for our tag selector, give it a space, put your curly brace in, and the declaration we're going to write is background dash color. Give it a full colon, give it a space, and let's put our hex color in. So we're going to do the hashtag, and we're going to do BDB 8AD. And there's our closing semicolon for the declaration, and there's our closing curly brace. Let's save it and see what changes. So now you notice we have more of an attractive page because we've defined the background color. But let's make it a little more interesting, because remember that we have a div that only goes 580 pixels wide. So let's set a different background color for the inside of the div so that we have more contrast and our text will be easier to read for our visitors. So we're going to set a background color for the div as well. So let's go back to the CSS in our head. There's our div. We can use the same div rule, but we'll come in after the first declaration, come down right under the first declaration and write our second declaration that gives us background color. Background dash color. Do hashtag, and we'll do all Fs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Save this. Let's refresh. You see it creates a white background color inside the div that makes our content easier to read. Let's keep working. Let's do some more to this div. Let's add padding. Padding is the space inside of a container. Our container is the div, and it's going to be the space between the content and the outside wall of our container. We want to create some space between our text and the edges of our container to make it look nicer. So we're going to use padding for this. Padding creates the space between the content and the outside wall of a container such as a div. So let's go back to our text editor. And we're going to do this in the same rule in the div. We're going to add a new declaration after the background color. Padding, :space, 20px, and a semicolon. Now padding is going to put the same amount of space around the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. We can look at how to control these more as we get farther into the exercises, but we're just going to set the global padding to move the content away from the edges. Save that, come back in here. Now you see you have nice margins that have been set up by adding the padding. It's starting to look good. Let's make this look even more professional. Let's center this web page in the browser window. Now remember, padding is the distance between the content and the outside wall of a container, which is our div. There's another property called margin that's the space between the outside wall of the container and the rest of the environment. So padding is inside a container, margin is outside the container. And if we set the margins to auto, it will center this page for us. So let's go to the text editor and do that. We're going to go back to our div, which is the same rule we've been working with for another declaration. And let's set the margin dash left to auto. We're going to do the same thing to the right margin. I misspelled that. You see how it's white? That's what's cool about Sublime Text is I did not code my R and it's wondering what the heck I've just coded. So that looks good. So that's what's better about Sublime Text than TextEdit on the Mac or Notepad on the PC. This will help you out while you're coding. If you're going to make an error in your code, it might show you a different color that you're not used to say that you're not coding it properly. So let's go margin dash right to do the right margin. And remember, the margins are outside of the container. Give that a space and put auto in for our value. Let's save that. Go back over here, refresh. And that centers our page. So when I move the browser, the page stays in the middle. So we've used padding to set the space between the content inside of the container. We use margin to work with the spacing outside of the container, which is our div that we're working with. Let's go ahead and put a border around our container. The div can have a border around it. You can have border color, the width of the border, and the style of the border. So let's go back into our div rule and actually add a border that's solid 1 pixel wide with a color. Just make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to come down here after the margins in our div. I'm going to write border width, that's how wide our border is going to be. We're going to use this in pixels as the unit of measure. We're going to have a thin border. Let's go for 1 pixel. Let's write a new declaration and set the border style. Do a colon. We're going to use a solid line. You can use dashed lines. You can use dots. There's a lot of different border styles. Generally, the solid line is the most professional looking. Let's do one more declaration for the border color. Now, don't just put color in because we've already used color for text other places. So when you have to specify the border color, it's border-color. And we'll do our hashtag and put some hex code in 959485. So let's save this. Go back to our web browser, we'll refresh and we'll see a small 1 pixel black border appear around all edges. You can control one edge at a time if you'd like to. You could use a different border for the top and the bottom and the right and the left. So now the book wants us to show you how to do cleaner HTML. We just showed you how to do border that was very descriptive. You can do it to where it's a cleaner one line of code to accomplish the same thing. So let's go back into our text editor where it won't change the look and feel, but it'll make your code a little bit leaner. So what we're going to do is write some code that replaces the border width, style, and color all in one line of code. So we can come up here under the margin and tab in. I'm going to just write border, colon. The first thing you'll put is the border width. So you're just going to put 1px, give it a space. Then for the style you can write solid, give it a space, and then you'll put your color after that. This is the same outcome, it's just going to be a different way of coding it that makes your code cleaner. So the hex color is 959485. Now I don't need this code down under here, it's redundant, so I'm getting rid of it. I'm just going to highlight it, I'm going to delete it. Clean that up, we'll save this. Go and refresh this, and nothing changed. It's the same result, just cleaner code. Let's do this now. Let's clean up more code that's redundant on our pages. Let's look back at our CSS in the text editor. And you'll notice that we're using the same font family for all the H1s, the H2s, and H3s. It's all Arial, Helvetica, and then a default of sans serif on the font wish list. So what we can do is we can write this font family information into the body tag because it's the most global and get rid of the repetitive tags in the H1s. So in our rule for the body, we're going to come in here and write, actually don't even have to write. It's going to be the same thing. So I'm just going to copy the first rule. And edit paste that. Now since the body is the most global tag that we're going to select and apply the CSS rule to, it's going to affect everything below it. So we're going to get rid of these lines in the H1 because it's redundant. We're going to get the same line out of there for the font family in the H2. It doesn't make a huge difference, but the leaner you can write your code, the faster your pages will load. So if you have a lot of code, every time you can clean up code like this on a page, it really helps the load time for your users. Now we're going to save this and check it out in the browser before we go any farther. Come over here and refresh this, and nothing changes. That's good. That means it's still applying that font family rule to every piece of text on the page.